now.
Well, welcome everybody to the Yoga Philosophy Group, coming to you from the Yoga Center of Chico. I'm Lauren Carley, and with me is Tom Hess. In this series, we are studying the Bhagavad Gita and how to relate it to your life. We use a translation by Eknath Esfaran, but you can use any translation you like. I'm honored to introduce our presenter for this session, and owner of the Yoga Center, Tom Hess. Tom?
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you all for participating in our Bhagavad Gita study group. Today's chapter, the one that we're studying, is chapter 4, titled Wisdom in Action, or Jnana Yoga, J-N-A-N-A. It's important to sort of understand what that word means, jnana. It means intelligence or wisdom, which from a yogic point of view is a step above simply the observing mind. For those of you who understand the koshas, it's the Vijnanamaya koshal level of understanding. It denotes a particular set of wisdom and knowledge. So that's what this chapter is about. And of course, this wisdom and knowledge that Krishna is talking to Arjuna about is nothing but a reiteration of what he's talked about before. But Arjuna, being who he is, he's not getting the message, which is sort of a representation of what we are as spiritual practitioners. We can get all of this knowledge and understanding, but until we embody it into form of knowledge, we really don't have it yet. And so that's why we have to keep at it. And that's what Krishna is doing with Arjuna here at the beginning of chapter 4. So at the beginning of chapter 4, Krishna starts off talking to Arjuna about the various sages and wise men that he has educated or taught this spiritual wisdom to in the past. And of course, this is millennia ago. Excuse me. Arjuna comes back to Krishna and says, Krishna, how can this be? You weren't even alive back then. How can you tell me that you taught these sages this wisdom when you weren't even alive? And Krishna goes on to, and this is a perfect opportunity for Krishna to reintroduce or revisit this whole idea that he's trying to tell to Arjuna about what he calls spiritual wisdom. Spiritual wisdom is the understanding that the soul lives on, the essence of who we are lives on, but the body dies at whatever time. In war, in old age, it dies. And the important thing is the soul, Atman, Brahman that lives within us, continuing on. And Krishna goes on to tell Arjuna, this is what happened. I was reincarnated in this form, but I was also in that form back there, giving the same knowledge to these sages back then. And the reason I gave them to them back then is Dharma was disturbed. Like it is now, he's talking to Arjuna. Dharma is disturbed because the Kauravas and the Pandavas war, it's out of balance. So Krishna in this personification is a reincarnation of Lord Vishnu. Vishnu is part of the trilogy of Indian gods, Brahman, the creator, Vishnu, the sustainer, and Shiva, the destroyer. So Krishna is a reincarnation of Vishnu. And the way that we know that, the way that that's understood is Krishna is coming back into society to sustain Dharma, to sustain things, get them back to where they were because they were out of balance, because the Kauravas took over the kingdom and the Pandavas really deserved it. So that's why we're here. So this was Krishna's opportunity then to reintroduce this whole idea of reincarnation. One has to recognize that Krishna is a special being. Krishna can do this because he's an avatar, someone who can come back and to the world with full knowledge of their past lives and how they can sustain, in Krishna's case, to sustain Dharma. So it's confusing because for Arjuna, he sees Krishna as his charioteer, and he's a prince in the army of the Pandavas. And so he sees him on a daily basis as just one of his princes that controls an army. But now Krishna is telling him all of these really spiritual ideas and concepts. So it's sort of hard for Arjuna to get a good grasp of Krishna because he sort of changes appearance sometimes. But when a person really knows Krishna, when a person really understands that essence, he then knows himself. This is the big piece of the puzzle. It's the spiritual wisdom. By studying, devoting, honoring, performing bhakti towards Krishna, one gets to understand Krishna, therefore understanding the true self within. So all of the roads of the spiritual pursuit lead to Krishna, which is Krishna is a representation of the Atman that lives within us all, that higher level of wisdom that lives within us. Krishna goes on to start to define to Arjuna this idea of action and non-action. But Krishna, before he does that, he establishes, I am a non-doer. He's the ultimate non-doer. He's the one that never accumulates karma because he has no expectations of any positive or negative results from his actions. So that is how Krishna defines karma or action. Those who are wise travel through life not getting attracted or repulsed by the various life paths, and therefore they do not accumulate this karmic buildup. So they're more free. While most people, Arjuna and the rest of us, when we go through life and expect results, positive or negative, we are disappointed or enthralled or one emotion high or low. And this emotion is a karmic imprint that exists within us that we take forward into our next experience. So that's action. Non-action is going through without this accumulation of wisdoms. One way to alleviate some of this accumulated karma, this accumulated baggage, so to speak, that we accumulate through our journey of life, is devotion to Krishna. And devotion to Krishna means that you understand. So the whole gist of this chapter is really that once one acquires spiritual wisdom or knowledge, they can see themselves more clearly. They've cut through, fired away, got rid of the various karmas that they've accumulated and vow to not let a karmic imprint be put upon them going forward. And if you do some of these practices that I'm about to describe, you can also burn off some of these impurities so that the existing karma that you have within you can be gone, can be alleviated. So Krishna goes on to tell him how if one has devotion to Krishna, a practitioner can be put into a state of divine union, which they see God in all things. And this is an important point. Once one sees the Krishna within oneself, the Atman within, that then means that knowledge gives them the ability to perceive or see that energy within all living beings. And that's the goal, to see God in all things without taint of attraction, aversion, like, dislike, just see that essence. He goes on to tell Arjuna then that he created the four castes, the three gunas, and karma as this whole idea of accumulation of things throughout life. So right here, he's telling Arjuna that he's been around a long time and he created the whole system and everything that's gone on. Yet he's here in a reincarnated form just talking to Arjuna. But he's been those other things as well. Krishna goes on to talk about the higher self within us, which is Krishna, which I've talked a little bit about. Krishna then goes on to talk about the various offerings to Brahman or Krishna or the Atman within that we can do or offer to alleviate some of these karmas and burn off some of the residual karma. Okay, some of these are, we can certainly devote or donate or offer our material things of life, the things, money, offerings to the Lord, whatever. We can renounce enjoyment. And it's really about an attitude behind it. We can do enjoyment and not get attached to it or averted from it. But in the end, we have to then honor that self within with this. We have to donate it or offer it to Krishna. We can have enjoyment and offer those things. Self-control of the senses, one of the yogic paths, is an offering to Krishna or that Atman within. Other vows that you can give, or having the knowledge from studying the scriptures, you can, like we're doing here, this whole process of studying the Bhagavad Gita is studying the scriptures, which is a way to offer this to the higher power, to Krishna, to Atman, and our understanding of this furthers our perception of Krishna, which advances all of us along that spiritual path towards knowledge. So that's we're basically making this an offering to our spiritual path. Meditation, pranayama, restraint of the senses, all of the yogic 8 limbs of yoga, especially the last 4, 5. 5 are most important to practice, and they will lead you towards this understanding. These offerings that one does, that we do, that all spiritual seekers do, are offerings to Krishna, to Brahman, and they're intended to burn the impurities of the offer. Because remember, Brahman or Krishna, they aren't attached. They're not attached to us doing what they want. They're just saying, hey, if you do this, you can understand who I am. When you understand who I am, you can then understand who you are. When you understand who you are, you can turn that around and see the world around you and better understand, better see the connection between you and the world around you. That's the real goal, see this connection. But okay, so Krishna says, all right, Arjuna, you can do one thing that's better than all of the other things, and that's knowledge. Learn this stuff, know this stuff, grasp this stuff, embody this stuff, and that's the best offering you can give to me. That's what I want. Spiritual wisdom will reveal that all creatures are in the self and all are in Krishna. This spiritual knowledge, this knowing, is a result of doing. You have to do in the world. You have to act in the world. But the point is, how do you frame your intention? How do you frame your expectation or your about the result? What Krishna is telling us is, don't expect anything. Just do your dharma. Do your work in the world. Knowing is the fruit of doing. Thank you. Lauren?
All right, thank you, Tom. So now we will talk a little bit about a couple of practices that you may want to try to actually start doing maybe a little deeper and more specifically what Tom just talked about. Now, some of you may be watching this on YouTube and not have the documents that we send out. I do send out a list of practices, and you can email us if you ever want to get them, but you may not have that. The first one comes from Gita verse 4.33. And that verse says, the goal of all work is spiritual wisdom. The goal of all work is spiritual wisdom. And of course, what that points to is everything you do that you can consider work, you can gain spiritual wisdom from that. And Esmoran says the same thing a little bit differently, but it might resonate better with some of you. Wisdom is the goal of selfless action. Knowing is the fruit of doing. So here's an example of a piece of work that you do regularly that you might be able to gain spiritual wisdom from. You can close your eyes or just soften your gaze. I'm going to walk you through it really quickly. And it is Utthita Trikonasana. Pick any asana, but I'm using Utthita Trikonasana. So normally you would hear from the teacher or from yourself, take a nice wide stance, turn your right foot out, left foot back. And the Utthita, the extended part of the asana, is going to the right. And then some people will say windmill your arms into position. But you come into Trikonasana. Now you may be on this particular day, on this particular side, able to flex deeper into the pose. This may be the first time that you can move your hand from your leg to a block down back by your outside right ankle. You may be able to put your hand on the floor for the first time. You may just feel great in the pose and know that you are doing the pose to the best of your ability, including not collapsing to the floor. But as you listen to the dialogue in your head, giving you praise for what you're doing, you feel good about what you're doing. You may even be saying to yourself, oh, I can't wait until I get back in the studio and Tom can see how deeply I can really go into this pose now. Be aware that your intellect, so that's your ego ahamkara voice that may be talking at you. Be aware that your intellect voice may come in and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't right. You are in the thrall of the ego, but it's okay to feel good about what you're doing. It's okay to even pat yourself on the back and say, hey, I'm doing this pose really well to the best of my ability. The difference is that now you've switched on your consciousness and you're not just feeling the effort and accumulating praise and attaching yourself to the result. When you switch on your consciousness and your intellect, your buddhi comes into play and has you consciously aware of what you're doing on the right side in Utthita Trikonasana, then you're moving to detachment. So you come up to vertical and you say, oh, okay, I'm going to go on to the left side and really consciously try to practice this. So you set yourself up, nice wide stance, left foot out, etc., and you extend and you flex to the left with your arms, however you may arrange them. Now the left side may feel completely different. It may hurt. You may stretch your right side. You may have a kink in your back or whatever. But the effort is you try to do the pose the best you can and just simply notice what you're doing and how it feels. As Tom is saying to us constantly, be in the pose. But my challenge to you is this: the wisdom from action, the fruit that we're trying to get, this wisdom that Tom mentioned at the very end that you devote to Krishna, is what do you do next? You can take that I am in the pose, I'm reposing in the pose, and dedicate it to Krishna the Am. This chapter gives you some place further to go. It gives you some place further in your mind to take your action and take your wisdom. This is the beauty of this chapter. It's like the second stage of chapter 3. Okay, a couple more activities that you may want to try to actually practice wisdom in action. Oh, and I might say, I use Utthita Trikonasana. As you go through your day, every action you do is a potential source of gaining this kind of wisdom that Tom talked about at the end that you can dedicate. Look around, it's everywhere, it's every minute. Tom touched on this, the 8 limbs of yoga. I want to highlight the niyama practice of self-study, savadhaya. This is what this chapter is also talking about, is the self-study of your actions to gain wisdom. Mr. Iyengar said in his Light on Yoga, at least in my book, it's page 38, the person reads his own book at the same time he's writing it, at the same time he's revising it. That is an example of wisdom in action. And if both of those don't work for you, here's one that I use every once in a while. Take the fruit of an action, take something that you've attached to, and visualize throwing the whole bundle into a blazing bonfire. It's a more dramatic, it's like using the bigger hammer. But let me tell you, sometimes you are in a situation where, let me tell you from my own experience, sometimes you're in a situation where you just have to mentally take all that garbage and just throw it, figuratively speaking, into a large bonfire and let it burn up. And ask yourself the question, can I do it? Can I burn it up? It's a little bit different than the burning Tom was referring to, and so I'm saying it with tongue in cheek, but it's a real practice that at least I use, and sometimes the drama of it is what you need. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, there we are. Our 5th week, 4th chapter. Join us next month for the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Thank you.